Hello and welcome back. All right, we are going to begin chapter 3, or A Woman's Peculiar Calling. That is the name of the chapter, so that'll be something from Miss Hepplewhite. How I dreamed of William in the months that followed. His gray eyes and bright blonde hair filled my thoughts, and of course, his lovely teeth. Girls, Miss Hepplewhite declared, please open your books to chapter 10. I looked out the window, daydreaming about William. The summer of 1851 had come and gone in its hot, hazy way, and the crisp scent of autumn was in the air. I was 13 now, and the girl who had run around eating pies all day and playing with Jebediah Parker was a distant memory. Who would like to read? I raised my hand. Now that I was older, I sat in the middle of the room. I had made a few friends, but Sally Biddle was not one of them. Go on then, Miss Peck. I cleared my throat. By now, we had reviewed each chapter of The Young Lady's Confidant numerous times. I almost might have recited the text from memory. So, it's the only book they have, and just every year, they just study it over and over and over. Chapter 10, or A Woman's Peculiar Calling. It is a woman's peculiar calling to please those around her. Do not put your own desires in the forefront, but rather think first of your good parents, your brothers and sisters, and most especially, one day, your husband. I looked up. Well done, Miss Peck paused, looking at us with serious eyes. Girls, you must strive always to please others, and do so cheerfully, for this is where your true happiness lies. She toured the room. One means of obtaining this happiness is to make your house a home. By bringing cheerfulness to your home, you express your grace and refinement to those around you. Some of the girls in front of me nodded their heads thoughtfully. Little details should not be overlooked, Miss Hepplewhite continued. Fresh flowers or a thoughtfully designed menu that takes into consideration the particular tastes of your guests is a perfect example. Miss Hepplewhite smiled and clasped her hands. A well-ordered home is a miniature of heaven. Sally Biddle leaned forward. What a shame, Jane, she murmured. I shouldn't think any man will consider that house on Walnut Street a miniature of heaven, although it is small. My eyes started to sting. I bit my lip to keep from crying. Miss Biddle, Miss Hepplewhite called in a firm voice. Yes, Miss Hepplewhite, Sally Biddle said politely. The size of one's house does not determine the nature of one's character, Miss Biddle. Sally Biddle flushed in embarrassment. And Miss Biddle, Miss Hepplewhite said sternly, a person who says unkind things is not a proper young lady. I looked gratefully at Miss Hepplewhite. She nodded almost imperceptibly and turned back to the lesson. So a little bit of satisfaction that Sally Biddle gets busted for her little nastiness. I went home inspired to prepare a meal that would please Papa. Sorry. Mrs. Parker and I were discussing my idea in the kitchen when there was a knock at the front door. Oh dear, she said. She was covered in flour. I'll get it, I offered. A lady should always be cheerful and helpful. I opened the front door and bright light flooded in. I blinked, and for a brief moment my heart leaped. William? Then I blinked again. It wasn't William after all. It was just a delivery man from Blood's Penny Post. Letter, miss, the man said, holding out the packet. I gave him a coin and took the envelope, turning it over in my hands. It was rumpled and thin and a little dirty, as if it had passed through many hands to arrive at Walnut Street. It was from William. I ran upstairs to my bedroom and closed the door. My hand shook in excitement as I imagined what he had written. I could practically hear his words. No doubt he would say how much he missed me and our little talks and how he couldn't wait to return to Philadelphia to be with me. I tore open the envelope carefully and went to a window to read the single sheet of paper. So, of course, she's like hoping that he's missing her and feels the same way she does. So let's see if in this letter from William, if that's what we hear. And it's really neat in the book. You can see that the author writes it like a letter, which is kind of cool. So I feel bad that you guys don't have the book, but that's what it'll look like. Okay, so he wrote this May 15th, 1851. And I'll read you the date because it's so interesting to understand how long it took for mail to actually get where it was going, because I think for her it's like winter. And he wrote this back in May. Dear Miss Peck, having arrived in relative safety at Shoalwater Bay, I am now undertaking to become better situated with my surroundings. It is a rich countryside. Game and fish are plentiful. The local band of savages is called Chinooks. They are very skilled at trading and have been trading for many years with the British. I am told that their numbers have been much reduced by disease, but there are still many in the area. My regards to your father. As ever I remain, William Balt. Kind of just a basic letter. I nearly cried with disappointment. He hadn't even inquired about me. Had I meant so little to him? The letter seemed almost impersonal. Did this mean he was actually going to stay out there? Would I never see his lovely eyes again? I stared hard at the letter and felt my throat go tight at the very thought. Jane, do you think I should make a plum pudding? Mrs. Parker called up the stairs. I swallowed hard and put the letter on my desk and hurried down to help her. All right, so there's little dots that indicate that now time has passed. I threw myself into my studies to take my mind off William's disappointing letter. While I enjoyed the embroidery and watercolors and drawing and music classes, etiquette was still my favorite subject. There was the importance of punctuality, Chapter 9. Young ladies who are not punctual means being on time. When traveling, think up any manner of excuses. The truth is, the unpunctual do not allow themselves sufficient time. Miss Hepplewhite said, pointing to an ever-present pocket watch that hung from the chain on her skirt. Being a good guest, Chapter 11, quote, a gracious guest should not interfere with the domestic routine of the house. Be as little trouble as possible. Never, Miss Hepplewhite stressed, never be in the way. And of course, pouring tea and coffee, Chapter 3. Quote, a young lady who can preside over pouring tea and coffee shall always be admired, Miss Hepplewhite promised. We also reviewed Rules of Conversation, Chapter 2, Receiving and Returning Calls, Chapter 4. Now remember, a call wouldn't be a phone call. There was no such thing as phones. Call would be going to someone's house to call on them. Deportment on the Street, Chapter 13, Care of Odd Minutes, Chapter 14, and The Particulars of Domestic Economy, Chapter 15. Then came the fateful day when we learned about the Great Mistake. And the book has great and mistake capitalized, so it's something. Strangely enough, there was no chapter in the Young Lady's Confidant with this title. Miss Hepplewhite looked very grave as she stood at the front of the classroom, leaning next to her elegantly carved desk, her hands clasped in front of her. Dear girls, she said, her voice catching. If you learn no other lesson from me, then learn this. She lowered her eyes. We leaned forward. Beware the great mistake. Some of the older girls near the back giggled. Miss Hepplewhite looked up sharply, and the room went quiet. The only sound was a bird singing outside the window. A kiss may seem innocent, but it is the greatest mistake a young woman can make, for it leads to other intimacies, and that is the path to destruction. I remembered William's kiss on my hand, how it had tingled and felt warm for days after, how I had resolved not to wash it, but in the end, as it had become sticky with jam. There were more giggles from the back of the room. Modesty, girls, that is your watchword. Do not allow a handsome face to lead you astray. Her voice was nearly a whisper. Beware the great mistake. After school, I heard some of the older girls talking. The great mistake, Sally Biddle mimicked. I shouldn't mind making a few mistakes with that nice Horace Fink. The girls giggled. Or Godfrey Hale, Cora Fletcher suggested in a hushed voice. He has a very agreeable face. And while it was true that Horace Fink and Godfrey Hale had grown up, all I could remember was Horace's big ears and Godfrey's finger up his nose. Sally Biddle caught sight of me. Jane Peck, Sally Biddle said in a satisfied voice. My, what an unusual hairstyle. Wouldn't you agree, Cora? Very interesting indeed, Cora murmured. Yes, Sally looked at me, an innocent expression on her face. It reminds me of a... She paused, searching for the right words. A squirrel scampered up a nearby oak tree. A squirrel's nest, she finished, a bland expression on her face. The girls laughed. I touched my hair self-consciously, noticing the stray strands coming free from the knot I had arranged that morning. It wasn't my fault my hair was curly and prone to looking wild. I was doing the best I could. And I was good enough. I had studied faithfully and knew how to pour tea and embroider handkerchiefs and listen well. Even Miss Hepplewhite said that I would make a fine wife, that I was pious and meek and modest in all respects. I thought of William's letter waiting on my desk unanswered. As a matter of fact, I am corresponding with a most agreeable gentleman, Dr. William Balt, I said in a steady voice, amazing myself, and he thinks my hair is most becoming. William Balt? Cora Fletcher asked curiously. Her eyes lit up. I remember him. He is indeed a most agreeable young man. I smiled triumphantly at Sally. She narrowed her eyes at me. When I returned home, I hastily penned William a reply. So she's going to write him back so you can see the letter. So it's October 2nd, 1851. So he had written in May. Now she's writing back in October, so it took a few months. Dear Dr. Balt, I was ever so pleased to receive your letter. Did you know that it took nearly 4 months to reach my hands? This day, Miss Hepplewhite discussed how to avoid draggled petticoats. The recommended way is to hold one's skirts at the back so as not to reveal one's ankles when strolling. It is very scandalous to reveal one's ankles, although Papa says there's nothing particularly scandalous about mine. Mrs. Parker has hired a new girl. Her name is Mary Hearn, and she is Irish. Mary is 2 years older than I, and says she doesn't care a whit if some man sees her ankle. She isn't about to kill herself tripping, considering the number of times she walks up and down the stairs every blessed day. I like her very much, even if she is a bit crude. Could you please write me some interesting things about the wild frontier? Yours truly, Miss Jane Peck. So now we know Mary is the girl that's on the ship with Jane on her 16th birthday when the book starts. So now we know where Mary came from. Mary is from Ireland, and she got hired by Mrs. Parker, so she's a servant also in the house, a paid servant, and that's who Mary is. Many months later, I received his next letter. I ripped it open, eagerly looking for any sign of his affection for me. To my dismay, none was to be found. So you can see there's his letter. And he wrote back in January. So she wrote in October of 1851, and he's writing back January 12th, 1852. Dear Miss Peck, thank you for your letter. I hope your studies at Miss Hepplewhite's are going well. You know my opinion in these matters. The donation law grants a man 640 acres if he improves the tract. As you know, I am intent on acquiring land, so this is a very good proposition. The first thing I did upon arrival was to choose a fine piece of land and duly stake my claim. Regarding your request for stories of the wild frontier, truly, this part of the frontier is not so very wild. We have all the comforts of home. The pioneers are engaged in a number of industries, chiefly oystering and timber. Your letter reminded me of the lovely meals at Walnut Street. I'm sorry to say that none of the men on Shoalwater Bay can produce meals as satisfying as Mrs. Parker's. I miss her cherry pie very much. As ever I remain, William Balt. I would have given anything for him to have written that he missed me and not Mrs. Parker's cherry pie. It was so disheartening. Even so, I faithfully wrote back that very day. And there's her letter. She's writing back May 18th, 1852. Oh my, here comes Sophie. All right, we're going to pause there.